said, we don't have a lot of allies, and when you look to the media, and etc., when you look to Congress, it's even more grim. It's really bad. We don't have any Ron Pauls in there. We don't have the group that we had there. But we do have someone who has the courage to fight for us, the courage to stand up to the machine, the courage to continue in bad circumstances, and that will be our next speaker, Thomas Massie, and he's making his way down from his hotel room right now, so we are awaiting his arrival. But you know, Mr. Massie spoke to our student seminar, and by the way, I haven't mentioned them yet. Our Ron Paul 2021 scholars are over here at this table. Now this should give us some hope for the future. This is a great group of young people who are interested in liberty, and they sat through a hardcore boot camp. It was pretty tough, right? You guys were getting pretty tired toward the end. Fortunately, we had Jim Bovard as the final speaker, and he was opening up with some great stories about the TSA. So that kind of woke you up after lunch, right? But no, it was a great event. These are upper division undergrads and grad students that joined us for a full day. Mr. Massie was a keynote speaker for that event as well. We had the great Jacob Hornberger from the Future of Freedom Foundation, gave a great talk. Jim Jatras retired from Congress and from the executive branch. Phil Giraldi retired from the CIA. And we really took a look at the difficulties of foreign policy and really spent some time talking about where we might be. And Jim Jatras gave a strong talk, and I'm going to put him on the spot. I hope we can publish his talk about the challenges that we face in the future. But this is a great program, and we're going to expand this program in the future because I think it really works well to have young people see that there are people who are professors of practice. They are professors actually who do share our views. We're not alone, and there is an ideology of a worldview that we follow, that we share, that we can pass on to the next generation because they're going to be fighting the battle as well. So we're grateful to have them there. And I was shocked by something that Thomas Massie said, and I admit, after 12 or 13 years in Dr. Paul's office, the last thing in the world I ever want to do again is put on C-SPAN. Because, as my own colleague Norman Singleton will attest to sitting over here, that was something we watched all day, every day. And I knew everyone's name and face in Congress. I don't want to do that again. But I didn't realize this. This is something that he said yesterday. I knew that the appropriations process was blown up. But I didn't realize this, Dr. Paul. This is one of the few little tools of leverage that we had, which is that when approach bills come up, members can no longer offer amendments to cut funding, to do anything. It used to be on appropriations on money bills. You could go down to the floor without having an approval from the Rules Committee and say, I want to do this, and you get your allotted time to talk about it. And it was a way for members to have a little bit of power, because you're 1 in 435 or something, to have a little bit of power, and that's gone. You actually have to go through the Rules Committee and have it pre-approved to go down to the floor. So essentially what this has done has completely gutted Congress as any kind of useful body, and has put everything in the hands of the Speaker and the committee leaders. So it's an absolute disaster, something to ponder on, but I've just seen Mr. Massie pull in, so
not be more excited than I am right now. To be at this event with Ron Paul is really recharging my batteries. I've got to see some of you already and look forward to meeting you during the break. I want to start out by telling you what the funnest part of the job is, because I'm going to tell you about a bunch of crappy parts of the job. The funnest part of the job is voting. I believe it or not, putting your card in the machine and pressing the button to vote. So I wanted to show you what the voting card looks like. You have one of these, right, Ron? One of these voting cards. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to 750,000 people in Kentucky. But they put my picture on it and let me vote for them. And I never forget that that's who I'm voting for. But it's kind of like a credit card machine in Congress. You put your card in there and you press a button. And you know the buttons are labeled yay and nay, because the Constitution says to register the yays and nays. But they're green and red in case you get to Congress and you can't read. So I say they stand for stop and go. So like Congressman Paul, I keep pressing the stop button. Well, I keep it in my wallet, and one day I was at a restaurant, and I went to pay for my meal, and it was dark, and I handed this to the waitress. And she went and she swiped it, she tried chipping it, she tried to get it to register, and it wouldn't work, and she came back and told me my card had been rejected. I was devastated. I thought we'd be washing dishes, my family. So anyways, I said, why was it rejected? And she showed me the card, and she said, sir, this card already has $25 trillion on it. That's the problem we've had, and they've gone over their limit here in the last few years. You know, it's really important to have a diverse staff when you get to Congress. A lot of people become zombies. They sell out because they hire the wrong staff, or they hire a staff that all thinks alike. So I like to have a staff that represents all the diverse viewpoints that are still valid and debatable. So half of my staff are Ron Paul people, and the other half are Rand Paul people. And you would not believe the arguments my staff had with each other. When I first got to Congress, the first thing I did, I didn't really know what I was doing. So the first thing I did was R&D, Ron Paul's bills. Everybody knows what R&D stands for, right? Rip off and duplicate. So the first thing I did was R&D about 3 or 4 of his bills on the very first day. Audit the Fed, of course. We got to introduce that. They actually got that one through committee a few times. They got a vote on the floor of the House. But for some reason, all these people who are in the House who are for auditing the Fed, they become senators, and they lose their constitution when they get there. So it's not passed the Senate yet. The other one of his bills that I R&D'd, ripped off and duplicated, was to repeal the Gun-Free School Zone Act. 95% of mass public shootings occur in a gun-free zone. They just advertise vulnerable populations, and they do not make you safer, they make you more vulnerable. Now, an very interesting turn of events, one of these bills that I reintroduced was the Industrial Hemp Farming Act. I'm going to subtitle this part of my speech, How Ron Paul Helped Mitch McConnell Get Reelected. So I introduced this bill. As soon as Ron left, I reintroduced it. We overlapped by 6 weeks, by the way. I got to spend 6 weeks on the floor of the House sitting next to Ron Paul. It was the best 6 weeks I ever had in Congress. But I reintroduced this bill, and you left too soon, Ron, because that next Congress, we were able to get a vote on his bill, which was my bill at the time, as an amendment to the Farm Bill. Now, it had been referred to the Judiciary Committee. They thought hemp was a drug, and so it wasn't even in the Ag Committee. So my friend Jared Polis, he's now the governor of Colorado, he came to me and he said, I think we should offer your hemp bill as an amendment to the Farm Bill. And I said, well, that's great, Jared, but it's in the wrong committee, and they'll say it's the wrong jurisdiction, and it's not germane, and they'll rule it out of order. And he says, I know, but I'm on the Rules Committee. So we got the vote on it, and the night before we voted, the first vote ever on industrial hemp in maybe 50 or 60 years in Congress, some of the hemp people called up and said, pull the amendment, don't take a vote tomorrow. And I said, why? And they said, we're afraid you're going to lose, and you'll set our movement back many years. I'm like, no, you need to know even if we lose, you need to know who your enemies are. Right. And the only way to know that is to force them to vote on this thing. So we plowed forward. Secretly, I had been whipping this among Republicans who were the most reluctant to vote for it because they thought it was marijuana. Even though Ron Paul had explained you could smoke a joint the size of a telephone pole if it was industrial hemp and all you would get is a headache. He literally told me that on the floor of the House. So I was telling folks like Jim Jordan and the Freedom Caucus, this is rope, not dope, okay? And then there are a lot of people who got mad. They're like, you do know we can eat this, and it can be fuel, and it can be all these other things. And I said, all right, it's feed, not weed. So you got to simplify your message. Anyways, we had secretly gained the support of many Republicans, and they let us have a vote on the amendment because they thought it would fail, and it passed. And they were shocked and terrified. Now it was on the Farm Bill. And if you know anything about Congress, there's two bills that are going to pass, three bills that come hell or high water: the NDAA, the Farm Bill, and the Omnibus Bill. Okay, so we are hooked to a locomotive that is going to the station, and they have one chance to get rid of it, and that's because there was going to be a conference between the House and the Senate, and the House Ag Committee hated this amendment, and they were just going to let it die on the vine because there was nothing in the Senate bill to support having it. So it was only there because we got it passed in the House. Well, a sort of miraculous thing happened. This was 2014, and Mitch McConnell was up for re-election. And he needed something to take credit for that was very popular in Kentucky. So the conferees that he named to this conference between the House and the Senate for the Farm Bill, he told them all, make sure that hemp amendment makes it through, and it did, and it became law. And then Mitch McConnell campaigned on that in his re-election, kind of to my chagrin. Like, I wanted to take credit, but I knew it was really Ron Paul's bill. So, anyways, that's how Ron Paul helped Mitch McConnell get elected. I don't know if you want to clap for that or not. Another one of Ron's bills that I introduced, I actually watered it down. The raw milk bill, I made it more of like a 2% milk bill. Skim milk freedom bill. Instead of saying it's all free and we're going to get the government out of all aspects of milk and raw milk, I just said, you know what, if it's legal in this state and it's legal in another state, we won't arrest you for taking that milk between those two states. It seemed like a pretty reasonable thing. So I stuck around, and I actually got a lot of co-sponsors before I introduced the bill. People who had no idea how much trouble they were going to get into by sponsoring one of my bills. So I got like 20 co-sponsors before I even put it in the hopper. And I put it in the hopper, and within hours of it going up on the website, the milk lobby came after me. And my wife, who's here today, she had her internet alerts were going off. I was in trouble again. She's got to keep, not Google alerts, but she's got some app to know when I'm in trouble, which is almost always. And so she was reading all these reports the milk lobby was getting put in mainline publications saying that people would die and I'd be responsible and the kidneys would fail and children would get hurt, and it was horrible. So my wife read all this, and she texted me, and she said, OMG, I did not realize the lactose lobby was this intolerant. We're still working on that one. Does anybody in here play music? The first thing you do when you learn to play is you just copy other songs and the other styles. And then you kind of develop your own style. So eventually I got some bills that weren't totally ripped off and duplicated from Ron Paul. One is called the Prime Act. And yes, thank you, if you know what it is. Do you know that it's an oligopoly. 4 companies control 85% of the meat processed in the United States. One is completely owned by the Chinese and one is completely owned by the Brazilians. And they love regulation. They love the USDA because the USDA keeps the small processors from intervening or allowing any farmer to get to a local market without going through one of these government propped up through regulations, parts of the oligopoly. And so I introduced the Prime Act that says, look, if your farmer's in one state and the processor's in that state and the consumer is in that state and they're consenting adults, let them do business. And since it doesn't cross state lines, I actually think the bill is constitutionally redundant. It should be obvious on its face that this should be legal anyway, and any attempt to regulate that is unconstitutional within a state. But anyways, Ron's son Rand wanted to introduce a Senate version of the bill. And I said, Rand, I would love for you to introduce this, but you've got the wrong name. You know, the Paul name's a pretty good name, okay? But I said, there's somebody with a better name, and I'm going to try and get him to introduce this bill in the Senate. And in fact, he did introduce this bill. His name is Angus King. Go look it up. Angus King is the lead sponsor. Rand Paul is the co-sponsor. You should have named your son Angus. So anyways, what happened, COVID hit, and you couldn't buy a hamburger. You couldn't buy brisket in the store, but you could see the cows walking around in the fields next to the Kroger's. You go to Wendy's and there weren't hamburgers. Sorry, we don't have hamburgers today. And some of the saddest things that happened is farmers had to euthanize animals, put them in wood chippers, and compost them because there was not the capacity at these industrial processing plants to take these animals. It was like Soviet Russia at the grocery store. If you went to buy meat, they had some meat. It wasn't what you wanted to buy, but we've still got meat, so nobody worry. Okay, the price is doubled and the shelves are bare, and you're gonna have a chuck roast instead of a brisket. But don't worry, you're not starved. So it was like Soviet Russia. So I immediately doubled the number of co-sponsors on this bill. We went from 25 to 50. And I think there's a good chance of eventually getting it passed. Another bill, you remember when Trump was going to name the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos? I got so many phone calls. People were, I don't know what it was about Betsy DeVos, but the left just was on fire, and they were calling me, wearing my phone lines out, saying, don't vote to confirm Betsy DeVos. Well, there's just one problem. I'm in the House. I don't vote on confirmation. We tried to explain this to all the people calling, and they said, you're just making up excuses. You can do something to stop Betsy DeVos. So I talked to my staffer who worked for Ron many years ago, Shauna Cranston, and she says, I've got an idea. Let's introduce a bill to end the Department of Education. I said, is there time to write it? The nomination is next week. And she said, it's just one sentence. I've already written it. On December 31st, 2017, the Department of Education shall terminate. We're not going to get into the details, and we introduced that bill. And then when people called up and said, what are you doing to stop Betsy DeVos? We said, we're trying to end her department. Because we don't think... And just to give some ointment to their Trump derangement syndrome, we said because we don't think this president should, or his appointees, should decide how or what your children learn. Don't you agree? They quit calling. And on a more serious note, one of the bills that I recently introduced is to prohibit mandatory vaccination of our military of COVID. The stories I'm getting are heartbreaking. They are heartbreaking. There are soldiers who have already had COVID, and contrary to what the CDC says, if you've already had COVID, your immunity is better than if you get the vaccine. The demographic of those highest at risk of myocarditis is age 19 to 24. Guess what? That's like 50% of our military, age 19 to 24. It's a small risk, but it's not there's no reason to put them in an unnecessary risk. And they've got heartbreaking decisions to make. By the way, more veterans and active duty members of the military commit suicide in one day than died from COVID last year. So we should not put them in this anguish of deciding, are they going to take a court martial? Are they going to give up at 19 years? They've got one more year in some cases, one more year to get full retirement that they have earned by putting their lives on the line for you and me and for the Constitution. Are we going to make them felons? Are they going to be court-martialed? Are they going to be lumped in with rapists and murderers and lose their right to own a gun when they get back to civilian life? Why would we put them through that? Unfortunately, I think it's part of a larger plan to sort of purge our military of a certain ideological bent, which is closest to our founding fathers, in my opinion. So anyways, we are fighting that. We've got 32 co-sponsors, and we will keep fighting it. Okay, now we're to the part of my speech that's going to get me in all kinds of trouble. Ron's Google alerts will be going off. Do you all think back to March 27th of last year? This was the day Congress was going to pass $2 trillion, a $2 trillion spending bill. But by the way, Larry Kudlow went on national TV a few days before and said, this is not a $2 trillion bill, this is a $6 trillion bill. Don't underestimate it. We're giving $400 billion to the Federal Reserve, and they can issue loans to private companies at a ratio of 10 to 1, so there's another $4 trillion. So don't undersell this bill, it's really $6 trillion. The more they talked, the more I didn't like it. But the worst part about it is they were going to pass this bill with nobody in Congress. They sent out an email and they said, stay home. We are going to pass it by unanimous consent with nobody but Nancy Pelosi here. But by the way, it passed the Senate, and due to COVID, Rand Paul and Mike Lee weren't in the Senate when it passed the Senate because they had to be quarantined or separated from the Senate. So the only place to kind of stop this freight train or even be a speed bump on it was in the House. And I called up all my friends in the House, and nobody wanted to object to this bill. It was 81% popular with Republicans. And I was in a Republican primary against somebody who said I wasn't Trump enough. He couldn't run to my left, he couldn't run to my right, so he ran to my Trump. Trying to get to the Trump of me. And this was the president's bill, too. To oppose this bill was to oppose not just Nancy Pelosi, but to oppose the president and everybody in Washington, D.C. But I said, you know what, with the House, the Constitution says each House may make its own rules of proceedings. But the Constitution does not give either chamber the right to suspend the Constitution, to suspend the very document. Yet this is what they were talking about doing. By the way, on March 16th, they had announced that we were going to do 15 days to slow the spread. I woke up on March 17th and did some math. That's what we do at MIT, we do math. And I realized 15 days was not going to be even a small dent in the slow of the spread. Even with basic algebra, but this is modeled with differential equations. I got up at 5 a.m., I was so troubled, and then Rhonda got up and I showed her the math, and she went to MIT too, and she said, you're right. This will go on for months. This will go on for months. This is not a 15-day proposition. On March 18th, Newsweek came out with an article. Right? By the way, I'm quoting a news source so I don't get branded as a conspiracy theorist, talking about the alternate government that would be put in place if Congress could fail to act. And by the way, this is a form of martial law. They were already introducing you to the person they had already chose. He went on Fox. He was being interviewed. Let me try to stay out of trouble, but it's not going to work. This is a Newsweek article. March 18th, exclusive. Inside the military's top secret plans if coronavirus cripples the government. Even as President Trump says he tested negative for coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic raises the fear that huge swaths of the executive branch or even Congress and the Supreme Court could also be disabled, forcing the implementation of continuity of government plans that include evacuating Washington and devolving leadership to second-tier officials in remote and quarantined locations. We were this close. The governors were saying, stay off the interstates. I know, because I could hardly buy gasoline trying to get to Washington, D.C. to stop this $2 trillion bill, which was on March 27th. So these are all of the things that were going on. We were at the cliff. I believe they would have used the excuse that Congress could not function, that Congress could not meet to institute. They were readying the public for this. By the way, it doesn't show up in Newsweek unless the government wants it to show up in Newsweek. They were acclimating people to this idea. And so I said, like hell you're going to pass this by unanimous consent, because it only takes one person to object. And I got in my car, and I drove from midnight until 9 in the morning. I'm going to tell you stuff I have never said in front of a camera, because I don't care. I was threatened. By the way, they said, okay, well, since Massie's coming, we'll at least debate the bill, but you still don't have to show up. We're still going to do this on a voice vote, and nobody needs to be here. And I was tweeting the Constitution, especially the part that says you have to have a quorum. And they define a quorum as at least half of Congress, so 218 people have to be there. And everybody was saying again, they were saying I was going to kill people, blood would be on my hands, blah, blah, blah. By the way, at this point, remember, Fauci was saying masks don't work. Just trying to get you into what time slot we're in. So I said, you all are coming to Congress. If truckers are working, if grocery store workers are working, if farmers are working, if nurses are working, if you get your health care paid for by the taxpayer, if you're making $174,000 a year, then by golly, you get your ass to work. And they did. They came. And they were terrified. There were people terrified that they were going to catch Ebola. By the way, Pelosi has since built a plexiglass box with no lid so that she could get elected as Speaker of the House. Did she teleport them to the plexiglass box? No, she doesn't. Anyways, but at the time they said I could kill people and blah, blah. And I was offered a better committee assignment. I was threatened. I was, in a very slick way, offered the president's endorsement in my primary if I wouldn't do this. I was offered a lot of things. I don't want to call them bribes. I'm sure they were all legal. I accepted none of them. So the time came. By the way, I slept in my car for 3 days. Wow. They did not know I was on a mission. Because there were really, anyways. So I'm sitting on the floor of the house looking at the microphone, and there's a 2-second slot where if you don't object or call for the quorum, history goes on and it never happened. And so I couldn't leave my seat. And I'm watching that microphone, and I get a call from the White House switchboard. It's like 202-253-0000. That kind of catches your eye when somebody has a phone number that's zeros. And I recognized it was the White House switchboard because I've been called on things before. And I was busy, so I let it go to voicemail. voicemail. They weren't leaving me a message. And then 253-0000 called again, went to voicemail. I thought, well, if it's important, they'll leave a message. And then a fourth call comes in from a different number that does leave a voicemail who says, you need to call the president back. He wants to talk to you. So they began the debate, and they yielded like each side 30 minutes or something. So I knew they weren't going to do the quarterback sneak, and I had a little bit of time to go to the speaker's lobby and make the phone call and call back. So I called back the White House, and they immediately put me through the president, who came on the line and said, I'm coming at you like you've never seen. Never in your life before have you seen the way in which I will come at you. I'll diagram the sentence, it's correct. It looks like a spider. I'm more popular than you in Kentucky. He's right, I've got the polling. And I'm back in your primary opponent, and you're gonna lose. And he took a breath, and I thought, well, I've got about 3 seconds to make a rebuttal. And I started to say, look, the bill's going to pass anyway. We need to go on record. It's got to be constitutional. We can't stop government. We can't suspend the Constitution. I think I only got like 2 of those words out. But that's what I was thinking. And he goes, no, this is the second time you've done this. And I was immediately hopeful because he had forgotten 6 of the times. They talked me out of it before, which is true. Like the most recent time he remembered was the January, when he said, if you vote for this bill, you're going to get a primary opponent. And I did get one the next day. It was the one time he remembered, the most recent time, was when we attacked an Iranian general, and then we had a vote in Congress to assert that if you want to escalate this into a war, if you want to strike Iran, you have to come to Congress for a vote to declare war. He told me back then that was not going to be good for my career because there were only 3. He said, well, there's only 2 of you voting for this, Republicans. And I didn't dare rat out the 3rd one. I knew there were 3. I was like, I'm going to save Rooney the trouble. He's since retired. But it was me and Matt Gaetz, and I think it was Rooney from Florida. And I said, look, if the worst thing that happens is I lose my election, I have to go back and live my life on my farm, I'm okay with that. So I voted for it, and so I got the primary opponent. Now I'm going back. This is like a movie where they move in time back and forth. So now I'm back to March 27th. Trump's still on the phone. He says, this is the second time you've done this. And he said, I'm coming at you. He just repeated it again. Repetition is the key to learning. I'm coming at you like you've never seen. Never before in your life have you seen the way in which I will come at you. I'm more popular than you in Kentucky. I'm back in your primary opponent, and you're gonna lose. Click. What do you got to lose at that point? I'm free! So I walk back on the floor of the house, and I'm thinking, what does it mean he's going to come at me? And then somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, turn on your Twitter, you need to see what's happening. So the president said I should be thrown out of the party. He said some tweet that still to this day doesn't make sense to me, can't understand it. And then he also called me, and this was really low, he called me a third-rate grandstander. Which when the media asked for me to respond to the fact that the president called me a third-rate grandstander, I told them I was highly offended, I'm at least second-rate. So, on that day, by the way, I had a discussion with Nancy Pelosi, and I did call from the quorum, I made them all show up. The first time since I've ever been in Congress, they denied a recorded vote. They would not count the people in the room who stood. But at some point, it was obvious I was going to lose because I had almost no support on the Republican side or the Democrat side. Nobody would sustain an objection or anything. So Nancy Pelosi went on TV and called me a dangerous nuisance. Donald Trump had called me a third-rate grandstander, which my wife points out is a double pejorative. Like, why would you want to be a first-rate grandstander? It might have been a compliment. We try to see things in the best light. Liz Cheney Max donated to my primary opponent that day, and John Kerry called me an asshole. I mean, that's all high praise to me. CNN called, by the way, CNN, who almost never gets the news right, called me the most hated man in Washington, D.C., and I thought, wow, they reported the news right today. It felt like I was getting crushed, like it felt like a physical manifestation. I was healthy, but it was hard to breathe, because it feels that way when you're there, and I don't know if you ever felt that way. I know Rand feels that way. It's almost a physical manifestation of the pressure on you when everybody's looking at you. When they're mad at you just for taking a breath of air, when they'd all be fine if you disappeared from the planet. It's hard, but the reason I did it is, and I think it was consequential. The bill did pass and they signed it, and they spent $2 trillion, and then they spent another $2 trillion, and then they spent another $1 trillion. They've spent $5 trillion in 18 months, which is $40,000 for every family, every household in 18 months. In 18 months, they ran up a federal deficit, or debt, which was more than what the debt was when you came into office, Dr. Paul. Like, in 18 months, they did more than 250 years of accumulated debt in 18 months. And I said, this is the biggest mistake. Here's the problem with that bill. There was an argument, maybe the Fifth Amendment, which says if the government takes something from you, and by the way, governors were taking livelihoods. Our governor sent state troopers to churches to write down license plates for anybody who dared to worship in defiance of his orders, his executive orders. He sent state troopers to write down their license plates. The police came to a couple in Kentucky and put ankle bracelets on them. Why? Because the woman who wanted to make sure she was clear of COVID before she traveled to Michigan, she went and got a test and she had COVID, and they said, sign this document that says you will quarantine. And she said, I'll stay in my house, but I'm not going to sign your document. And the police showed up with a bunch of cars, and they swarmed her house and put ankle bracelets on her and her husband in Kentucky. This is like, and a lot of people were okay with that. This is ridiculous. So back to the Fifth Amendment argument, if the government's taking something from you, they have to compensate you for it. But here's the problem. The governors were taking it, and the federal government was compensating. The feedback loop was broken. The governors had no incentive to keep their tax base going because the federal government was going to print money and prop them up. So we were creating the problem. The governors who were holdouts at that point had to give in, at least for a while, so that their people could qualify for the money that was going to get spent. So I was fighting it for that reason, but here's what I think we accomplished. I can't even use the word we. There was no single person that bad. I mean it the royal we. Here's what I think I accomplished. They were peddling fear and hysteria. This was an effort. This was a show to say that this virus is so bad, we have to suspend the Constitution. Look, even Congress is suspending the Constitution. That we prevented them from establishing that benchmark. I think we stopped the hopelessness which was setting in. People, they started contacting me. By the way, they sent me $73,000 before midnight that night. People from all over the country who said the president's wrong. They were Trump supporters. They said he's wrong on that. You need to fight this, and you're the only one fighting this. So we gave people hope where there was hopelessness. And we preserved our functional structure of government. It's not necessarily functioning, I say I made them come to work, but I couldn't make them work. I mean, but remember at the time, they had the guy, General Shaughnessy. Go look it up in the Newsweek article. Go see him on Fox TV. They were introducing you to the guy who was going to lead the replacement government. I think this helped avoid that. And if nothing else, making them come to work in order to spend $2 trillion made them more reluctant to spend the next $2 trillion so quickly. So we at least extended that period of time by making them come to work to do it. So, but here's one of the consequences. I think it was a chess move that our side didn't recognize what was happening. If you make the argument it's too dangerous for Congress to show up and vote, now you've just conceded the argument that it's too dangerous for people to show up and vote in November. They got played. They set the predicate for mail-in ballots in all 50 states by arguing that people who are elected members of Congress, it was too dangerous for them to travel or to go vote in person. And then that set the predicate for the mail-in ballots, and I'm sure there are a diverse number of views about what happened in this last election, but you don't have to believe numbers were twiddled on a machine anywhere to know that mail-in elections can be gamed. Some people call it good campaigning when they go to every door and watch people fill out their ballots, but I think it's bad for our republic, and that's why that was such a bad thing. But that is what keeps me in Congress, is one person can make a difference on a day. Running out of time, so let me speed this up and tell you a quick story about something that happened recently. Pelosi has mandated that you have to wear masks, and at first she did it, but then she realized she doesn't really have that power. The House makes its own rules, not the Speaker. So they had to pass something to make this rule that you have to wear a mask. But then she started modifying it and saying, well, if you're speaking, you can take your mask off. No, put them back on. If you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear it. No, now if you're vaccinated, put the mask back on. And one day she came out and said, until every member of the House of Representatives is vaccinated, we will wear masks forever. And on that day, I got 9 other congressmen to go with me, and we walked on the floor without masks and stood in front of the C-SPAN committee. It wasn't about us. Again, they're using Congress and the images on TV to set a predicate in every state, to set a pretext, a pretense, for doing this to you. And if you're going to succumb to mask mandates, then you're going to succumb to the vaccine mandate. You've already conceded that they have that control. So that's the day we stood up and fought. She fined us each $500. And she made a mistake. She took it directly from our paychecks. I don't have to lecture you all on the Constitution, but just real quick primer. The last amendment that was ratified in the 90s. It was the 27th Amendment, and it says no law can be passed to vary a member of Congress's salary without an intervening election. She was varying our salary, and there hadn't been an intervening election. And the letter to us says she's reducing our salary. The facts are not in dispute. So what did we do? I've never sued anybody in my life. I don't even have a lawyer. But I found one, and we sued her in federal court for violating the Constitution. We believe she violated the 27th Amendment. We believe she violated the First Amendment because, by the way, as soon as you leave the view and sound of the C-SPAN coverage, they don't fine you. It's all about the show. As soon as you walk out of the chamber, the fine goes away. Walk into a committee room, and the cameras are there, the fine turns back on. It's all about compelled speech, and she was compelling our speech by making us wear masks. So we've got a First Amendment claim, a 27th Amendment claim. The base Constitution says that the salary of the members of Congress are set by law. Law, not a House resolution. You can't change our salaries by action of the House. It has to go through the Senate and be signed by the President. was not done in that way. So anyways, we've got this lawsuit against her. We'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're going to test the Constitution. My lawyer's hopeful. I'm not that hopeful, but we'll see. He doesn't get paid unless we win. And there are other members of Congress, 4 other members who've joined on this. Andrew Clyde, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ralph Norman. I think Chip Roy has joined it. So let me just leave you with this. We have to resist the mandates. The walls have already been breached at the federal level. They're willing to do anything, and there aren't enough people willing to stand up to it. The firewalls that remain are at the state level and at the local level. And when I first got elected, I ran for county judge executive because I saw that the sewer districts and the library boards, they were not elected, they were appointed, and they could use eminent domain. They could, by the way, you all remember the Supreme Court case, Kelo?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Annette, I think is her name. Do you remember who the other person on the case was? Was it the federal government? Kelo versus City of New London, not the DHS, not the federal government, the City of New London. The City of New London took her house to build a campus for Pfizer, which Pfizer eventually never built. So they just tore her house down for no good reason. But it was the City of New London that did it, not the federal government. So we need to fight at the local level, at the county level, at the city level, at the school board level. You need to fight there and you need to resist. And I'll leave you with this. If a mandate is unconstitutional, then opposing it is constitutional. If a mandate is unscientific, then opposing it is scientific. If a mandate is immoral, then the only moral thing to do is to oppose it.
Yeah.
If a mandate is illogical, it is only logical to oppose it. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massie. You got an uplifting speech. We're going to take a break now, stretch our legs, get some coffee and tea. We'll reconvene in about 20 minutes.
What organization did you say, Jerry?